Kristen, welcome to the Mental Game series. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
So, Kristen, you are an athlete, you're a mother of 5, you're a broadcasting legend around here. This whole series is about mental health, mental strength. Where does that fit in on your journey?
Well, I think it fits in everywhere that I do. Like you mentioned, I'm kind of doing so many things in my life right now. Trying to balance all of that takes a lot of mental toughness.
For sure, yeah.
Especially when you're pulled in 100 different ways, with the kids at home, or whether it's a game I have coming up, or maybe it's church callings. That was something ingrained in me, I think, early on. As you know, like as an athlete, that's something that if you don't develop that mental toughness, it's hard to play at an elite level. And so early on, as I went through challenges, I had 4 knee surgeries when I played. That was very taxing on me mentally, and ended up having to redshirt. Going through that redshirt year, I think really prepped me, for the rest of my career at BYU, and just being more mentally tough, studying the game off the court, right? Because you're kind of forced to. You're kind of forced to watch the game. That was big for me. I think that was one of the more challenging times in my life when I had to redshirt off of knee surgery and ended up having to transfer from Boise State to BYU. But during that time, I think it really just kind of changed the mental side for me and helped awaken that, I would say, more than before, where you can rely more on your skill set versus the mental side, and then trying to combine that. So that's kind of, gone throughout my career, and then also into broadcasting and into being a mom. And for sure has helped me be a mom, because I'm all over the place sometimes, and just trying to focus on one thing through the chaos gets a little challenging at times. Oh,
that's awesome. So let's talk a little bit more about that injury and that moment in your life. I'm sure there was a time period where you were struggling and trying to figure out how to get through that. Were there people that you leaned on, or things or tools that you developed to, lean more into the mental side of things?
Yeah, for sure. So I injured my knee when I was at Boise State. So I'd played my freshman year. It was towards the end of my freshman year at Boise State. Probably could have just done physical therapy, but back then, it was a little pushed more. Let's go do a scope and let's see what's going on. They did get in there and had to repair some things on the outside of my knee. And so after that, I did go into my sophomore year as a redshirt at Boise State, and then ended up transferring to BYU when the opportunity presented itself with Coach Judkins getting the job. I thought I'll come back home. There were other challenges up there as well, not only with my knee and having a redshirt, but just the way of life and certain things around the team that I, was just different than what I wanted, and kind of some of the standards I was holding myself to. And so the move I made to BYU and redshirting and with my knee, that was hard, because you're kind of resetting, right? I had earned my position up at Boise State. I was starting towards the end of my freshman year, and then to come to BYU, and I'm literally on a new team, new coach. These are players that I played against, kind of some rival players in high school, that now they're looking at me going, why is the new girl coming? Why is she coming,
Yep.
So that was very challenging. And then, you're redshirting, so you don't quite feel a part of the team initially, especially coming right in mid-season. I transferred in December of 2001. So you don't quite feel a part of the team, and as you start to get to workouts and you start to go with them, I still couldn't do everything. I'm still rehabbing this knee injury, which weighs on you heavily, because the mindset, right, is a big thing, and the self-talk and thinking through, can I get back? Can I get back to where I was? And then eventually, as you start to get to where you're playing, or even are able to be physical on that knee, the back of your mind, you're thinking, am I going to hurt this knee again?
Right.
And
it
wasn't
there.
an ACL type knee injury, but it was severe enough to where it messed a little bit with my mind. So all of that was a huge challenge. But I've had a great support system around me, especially my parents. I have great siblings that I really look up to. I had an older brother that played. He was nice enough to let me tag along. In terms of basketball, he played at the U, but I really learned a lot through him. And so I relied heavily on those people in my life going through that. And when I came to BYU, I met my husband soon after, and I was married going into my sophomore year. So he was always been kind of at the forefront of just helping me get through, challenges, whether it's after that initial knee surgery, I had to have a couple more just to stay playing. So the challenges continued. But that initial, I think, surgery and transferring is what really set me up to be more mentally tough for the next surgery, right? For the next challenge that came, and to build upon that.
Yeah, knowing that you could get through it because you had been there before. I think support system is so important too. I think so many times, especially when you're dealing with something challenging or difficult in your life, we tend to close up. right? And I think it takes a lot of courage to be vulnerable and open and rely on, the support system around you. I think that's awesome. How did you keep faith that and confidence that you could get back to playing at a high level? Was that something that you just had internally, or was your support system saying, "Hey, you got this. You can get back to a high level"?
I think it was a little bit of both, right? I mean, I think you've got that support system that's always cheering you on and pushing you to get better and giving you the positive talk versus maybe I'm doing more of the negative self-talk, right? Mm-hmm. And so that was important to have that support. But then also I was a very confident person through high school. Maybe not early on. I was always so tall and just kind of felt a little awkward. But the minute I got on that basketball court, that's where my confidence really grew. Because I knew I could use this to make a name for myself, to go play college, get my college paid for. Eventually, that would lead to more doors opening. So I was always very confident, and I think with the knee injury, even though it shook that just a little bit, I knew that I could go back and get there and compete. And at BYU, there was so many great people surrounding me, from the coaching staff to your recovery, and from the trainers that were helping you with that and get back to that, and just the culture that was created at BYU. At the time when I played, we were off that Sweet 16, right? That was the year in 2002. And so there was just a lot of high moments right there to enjoy, and just really, I think internally I wanted to get to that point. I wanted to help the team. I wanted to be able to play on a team where we could get back to the NCAA tournament. So that was kind of driving me, I think, behind everything.
Yeah, that's great. Fast forward a couple years, and probably a big transition point in your life, trying to figure out what's next after basketball. That's been a challenge for me, opening up a new chapter. You talk about a door closing, another opening. Did you always know you were going to get into broadcasting, or how did that come about?
So I actually majored in psychology here at BYU.
Awesome. Which
a lot of people are like, oh, didn't you do broadcast journalism or communications? But no, I never, ever crossed my mind that I would do broadcasting. And so right out of college, I wanted to coach. And that was where my mindset was, is I'm going to coach. And I applied it at Dixie State and Westminster, and I applied at a couple positions, and some that were looking really promising at the time. And then those doors kind of shut. And soon after, one job had closed, that door shut, where I thought I was going to get it. I got a call from a producer at BYUtv at the time. And back when I played as a senior, Coach Judkins had me do a lot of the interviews. I think he knew I wasn't going to put my foot in my mouth for some of those media interviews. And, whether it was a win or loss, I tended to do a lot of those. So I developed a good relationship with the producer at the time and with the camera crew, and knew them all on a first name basis. And so when a position opened up the next year after I had graduated, they gave me a call and said, hey, we want you to try this. Come try this, and see. And my first thought was like, there's no way. Like, this is nothing I ever envisioned I could even do, right? And there's that negative self-talk, but
it happens to all of us.
Right.
Yeah.
But I was grateful to have enough confidence and enough just support to say, no, go try this. You can do this, And so that first year, called a few games. I think probably that, initial deer in the headlights look that most broadcasters experience,
I've been
right?
there, yes.
You have to go through that to know what I'm talking about. But so it was something that I just fell in love with so quickly that I didn't anticipate this is what you're going to do. And that door swung wide open when the coaching doors closed for me. And being in the broadcast industry, there's a high level of stress. There's a high level of having to just kind of go with it, go with the flow, go with, things that are happening, even though it's not always perfect. Playing and going through what I've gone through in terms of my knee surgery and all that prepped me for broadcasting. And it doesn't quite seem like it, but when I redshirted, I sat out. I was a student of the game. I studied the game in a different light, right? Well, that now translates into what I do as a broadcaster, and that really helped me just to kind of analyze the game, break down the game, break down film, study certain parts about the game that I knew I'd have to talk about on air. So I think that was a really cool transition. When I didn't see it at the time, the hardship that I went through with my knee and having to sit out, it has helped me for sure in my job.
Yeah, I think relying on past experience, you don't always know why you're going through something, but I think there's a lot of value in that story. When I listen to you on a broadcast, the word that comes to mind is prepared. You're very prepared and studying players, studying game plans, like schemes, And I feel like I learned from, what you say on the broadcast, but where does that preparation come from?
Oh, that's very kind of you to say that. But I am an over preparer. As I go in, I like to have all my notes. I like to have everything just kind of laid out and get it all in my mind, even though it's on paper. That's how I prepare for the game. One thing that I really feel like we live by, in our home, and that I try to do as a person individually, is just be in the present, right? So in that moment, I'm not going to be able to be thinking about where my kids are at, or be thinking about all of these things, right, that are going on, scheduling, whatever it is. And that helps with being prepared for me. Like if I'm prepared, I can go into a game and just go with the flow and not feel like I have to look up a note here or look up, a stat here, that it's just already in my mind. And so I feel like as I'm preparing and I'm getting ready for a game, by the time I'm calling the game, I have everything in my mind that I need. You may not have everything. You can quickly glance at a stat or whatever, but for the most part, I'm so prepared that I come in with confidence. And so I come into a game feeling confident, feeling like I know both teams really well, and then it can just flow. Because as a broadcaster, you can't just give all this information up front. You cannot just drown your audience in it, right? I mean, you kind of have to pick your moments. You have to pick and choose when you can relay that information. Sometimes you don't get all the information out, unfortunately. But it just helps to be prepared, and it helps to be prepared not only in broadcasting, but in my life. Like every week, I've got to have a set schedule because my kids are going every which way, with their schedules, with carpool and things. And so being prepared, I think, is a big tool that I use in my life daily.
I think that's so powerful. I felt that in my life. When I have a plan and I can be prepared with that plan, that usually leads to more confidence in whatever I'm doing. And that's always a question that comes up. How can you be more confident in what you're doing? So I think that's really valuable. Let's talk about your role as a parent and a mother. You have very, very active kids, and they're growing up as athletes and involved in lots of different activities. What advice would you have for parents out there that are trying to raise mentally tough kids?
For sure, I think living in the present moment, right? I think that's one that we strive to with our children, and not getting too focused on, what happened last game, other than taking the growth of it and taking what you can learn from it and then moving on. But if you dwell on it too much, or you dwell on the things that maybe you're frustrated that you didn't do yesterday, or maybe, I just think that's a big thing for me as a parent, is be focused on the now and there and what's going on with my kids. And then also, I just think we really try to focus on growth versus accolades and accomplishment. And as a parent, sometimes that can get hard to do, because we want to win just as much as my kids want to win, right? Like we all want to win the game, but I think it's very important, and we tried to instill this early on with our children, is even if you win or even if you lose, there is still growth that you can pull from the game. And especially in a loss, right? Especially with failure. I've got different personalities with my kids. One kid in particular, my 11-year-old, he has failed over and over and over. He has been blocked and pushed and shoved by older brothers, right? And so he's not afraid of failure. He's not afraid to go out and try a move and travel and try another move and maybe turn it over. But then the next time he nails it. And it's so rewarding to watch that, because you can see the growth right before your eyes. And so that is something we're constantly talking about with the children. I think mental toughness, mental awareness has become more apparent, more at the forefront for people, but I still think it's lacking in youth sports. And that's something I've recognized. You've coached, I know you're helping coach in your dad's club. I'm helping coach my 11-year-old right now, and just trying to help those 11-year-olds think through, well, why did I do this? Why was I in the wrong position here? What was my mindset? Versus just getting after them and being a critic of what they're doing, but really trying to teach them. And that's what we focus on with our children. And I think that's very important as a parent. Try to teach them versus always being so focused on winning, because there's more growth in that.
Right, for sure. Focus more on, the process of things instead of, and growing and getting better and improving, and instead of, wins, losses, or how many points you scored, right?
Yeah.
That was something my dad did for me growing up. It was all about effort for him.
Yes.
It's like, if you can give your best effort, there's going to be some lessons in there, right? Good or bad. Any other advice or things that come to mind when parenting your kids or coaching? You said you've coached your kids a little bit as well.
I think it's important to not be afraid to ask for help, you know, and sometimes there can be that stigma on, you know, maybe what my kid's going through isn't quite normal, but we can solve this, right?
Yeah.
I've had the benefit of having my husband's uncle is a licensed therapist. He does a lot with like parent-teen interactions and communications and things like that. So we've really leaned heavily on him, especially with our teenagers, just trying to communicate and be effective in that. So as parents, it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to talk to other parents, say what's working for you, what's not working for you. And don't be afraid to try those things. Don't be afraid to be vulnerable with your kids and say, hey, why don't we go talk to somebody and just see if they can help you think through this? You're so frustrated with how you're performing, but I feel like you're performing well. Let's get on a medium ground and maybe they can talk us through that, you know? And so my husband's uncle, David, I mean, he's been phenomenal in working with teen and parent dynamics, and he's been so helpful for us to just communicate with our boys. Some of the things that he really talks about is letting them manage their own career, their own situation, right? It's more of a partnership versus you're always dictating to them what you think they should be doing, what you think, how they should be running their life. Especially with my oldest son who's been heavily recruited, it's been very valuable to be able to allow him to kind of just take over and manage his own recruitment and manage his own playing and where he wants to put in the time versus trying to pull him along and say, hey, let's go get shots, let's go do this.
Yeah.
But forming that partnership has been so valuable just to see the growth in him and the maturity. And then it's almost like they want it more. They're asking more for help. They're asking more for advice. They're asking more to go get shots up versus as a parent, you're always telling them, hey, you need more shots. You missed 5 shots in that game. Let's go get more shots up, right? But allowing them to now have control and kind of take that leadership on their own.
Yeah, and empowering them to take ownership,
absolutely.
Right? So, Kristen, you said you majored in psychology. How has that played a role in overcoming some of the injuries and developing a good mindset?
I really like to study the mind. That's kind of why I picked that major as I was going back and forth. And so I love to study the mind, even when it doesn't pertain to sports, but particularly when it pertains to sports. I think it's valuable just to study how we interact with our own self, right? Our own self-talk, coming off an injury, coming off a game where you didn't perform as well, coming off a game where you did perform well. It's so valuable to see how an individual, you know, kind of reacts to what happens or their situation or their environment. But just based off my knee surgeries and having that kind of, as I was studying it for school, it was very helpful to know self-talk makes a huge difference. Just visualization was a big thing for me as well as I was going through college. Not only through the knee surgery, but just to be able, when you're on the court going into a game, if you get anxious, you get nervous, which I sometimes experienced, that visualization was so crucial. And that was something that was really cool to be learning about in class and how that benefits.
Yeah,
and then
translating it.
I've got a game coming up, let me use this, let me try this, right? And back when I played, I know you probably worked with a sports psychologist as well, and when I played, we had one that we did a little bit and started to incorporate things with, and they were big on self-talk and visualization. And so those are things that I even still use as I'm calling games or with my children. I talk to them all the time about self-talk. You know, how are you talking to yourself? When you miss a free throw, what are you saying to yourself? You know, because if you're just beating yourself up because you missed that free throw, that's not going to benefit you, and it's not helping the team because you're probably going to miss the next one, right? I had listened to a podcast recently, and it talked about how the human mind thinks about 10,000 to 60,000 thoughts per day. So if you think about it, that's a lot of different thoughts that are popping into our mind, right? Sadly, 80% of those are negative thoughts. And so if we can flip that script, and if we can change, maybe even partially, you know, that percentage, that makes a huge difference. And that was fascinating to me to go through college and learn about that. I actually thought about getting a master's as well and continuing to go on, but then got right into broadcasting. So I really enjoyed learning psychology throughout college, and then just kind of applying some of the things I was learning in class to what I was doing on the court.
Yeah, so cool. That's where I kind of fell in love with mindset and mental performance training was in college. Once I got there and I started learning about these things, it was like, oh, okay, that's what's going on in my mind. Like awareness is so important. You have to be aware first off of all those thoughts going through, and then how do we improve it? What could we replace it with, and planning those things out. I think that's super powerful.
It's helpful to have someone that specializes in that as well, right? You know, and I was learning from professors at the time, but also, you know, as a team, as you're working with a professional who's a sports psychologist, it really helps you to just go, oh, that does make sense, right? If you're trying to figure it out on your own, it's hard to do. It's hard to decipher,
Right.
why am I, you know, doing this on the court, or why am I doing this, you know, and to really just dive into, well, if you change the script or you change how you think, or if you're able to have that short-term memory and move on to the next play, then you're going to respond better physically, right? And when I played, I was never the strongest, the fastest, the quick, you know, I was never the one, but I had to be smart. And that was something that I really put a lot of time in, was studying the game, having a high IQ. I love to broadcast games where I see a high IQ player, because you can pick them.
Yeah, you can
pick them out
recognize them,
pretty quickly, right? You can tell that they think the game and they're thinking 1 or 2 plays ahead, and they're in the right position, and they're taking away their opposing players' tendencies, or you know, knowing personnel, knowing the game plan. And when a player can put their elite skill set and their high IQ together, that's when you see greatness, right? And you see those players that are making it to the NBA, making it to the WNBA, making it professional. It's really fun to watch.
So, Kristen, you talked about staying present, staying in the moment. Is there anything you do to help you stay present and locked in?
It's hard to do at times, for sure, because I'm pulled in so many different directions. It's very important to me, especially with my children, to be in the moment, right? When I've got so many hats I've got to wear throughout my life, as a broadcaster, as a mom, in church, whatever it be with my family, things like that. In that moment, I just try to keep everything out of my mind and just focus on, you know, let's say
compartmentalize.
Compartmentalize things, especially with work. If I'm working on a game preparation 2 to 3 weeks before, and every single day I'm just, you know, prepping on something, that's too much. So I try to set aside time, compartmentalize. This is my time where I'm going to work at work. Typically, it's when the kids are at school, which makes a lot more sense for me, because they're at school, and when they do come home, I can just be focused on them.
Right.
But I do love to be engaged with my kids and drive them places. So when we're going to games, I'm able just to fully be focused on them, and to be able to take that moment where I stay in the moment and listen to them, and maybe how their day was, or you know, what's going on with them. Maybe they're nervous about the game that we're driving to, and talk them through some things. But it's been really important to do that, so that I can really be engaged with my kids, or be engaged in a broadcast. You know, if I'm at a game, calling a game, and I'm thinking about what happened the night before at my son's game, it's not going to be a great podcast, right? You've got to be in that moment. You got to be focused on that, and that's something I've tried really hard to do.
And so you feel like planning your day out, setting specific time aside when you can put all your focus into something, that's been helpful for you.
Very beneficial, yeah. When you have a crazy schedule like I do, and just trying to do so much in one day, if I can't compartmentalize that, then it gets away from you, right? And if I put it off till the very end, that's not going to work either. And so just even at the beginning of the week, if I'm, you know, game plan, okay, this is the games we have this week for what child, where we're going, this is the broadcast that mom has this week, mom needs this time on this day to sit down and work. I think it works for the family as a whole as well, not just individually, but the kids are very aware of my schedule, I'm aware of their schedule. Let's plan that out and make sure we know where everybody's going, everybody has a ride, or what they're doing. There's security in that, right? And a calmness, so that it's not so much chaos. That's the preparedness that I also am prepared in my schedule, and then also just in setting aside, being able to be engaged when I have to at preparing for games, or, you know, being with my children.
Yeah, that's great. So, Kristen, you talked about growth versus accolades. Can you talk a little bit more about what that means to you and your family and in your life?
Yeah, so this is actually something that my husband has done a really good job, that is always, when we talk to my children, whether it's off a loss or a win, to focus more on the growth. And so we've worked as a unit to really be aware of, you know, sometimes they'll have a game where we lose by 20, but it feels like a win because they did everything they could in their power. They were prepared. They performed at a high level. It feels like a win, and we're trying to help them recognize that. Not that I don't want to win. I think every parent wants to win and to push your child, and there's a lot of competitiveness in me, sometimes more than my children at times, but I really think it's important to focus on the growth versus the accolades, because if you get too wrapped up in the accolades, too wrapped up in the accomplishment or the wins or the losses, you're going to miss the growth. And to not be afraid of failure. I've tried to teach my kids that failure is okay, and that
It's part
comes
of the
with
process.
yeah, it comes with mental toughness. If you can really challenge the mind and continue to work on their mental toughness game, they're not going to be afraid of failure because they know with failure there will be growth. They'll be willing to take risks. They'll be willing to be able to push themselves, knowing that it's okay if I fail because I'm going to get better based off that failure. And Kobe Bryant was one that I've listened to a lot of things on him and just things where he talked about being focused on the growth versus being focused on, too much of the wins and losses. He would overanalyze what he's going to do against a certain opponent because that meant more to him than the accolades, right? And so he was so focused on things like that. And it's really interesting to study players like that because they are so tuned in to what they have to do mentally and focusing on that progress and growth versus the accolades. But then the accolades come. If you're focused on the growth, it all builds upon each other, and eventually those come. And you do win, and you do get to an elite level if you can really focus on the takeaways from failing or the takeaways from, what you could do better.
Really well put. Kristen, what role has faith played in this journey, dealing with everything you've gone through?
Faith plays a big role. If I even go back to when I played at Boise State, that was a big driving force why I ended up coming to BYU. And just having the faith to be able to, okay, I'm going to leave a program where I've already established myself, and then I'm going to go to a new place. I'm going to have enough faith that I can do this, that I have the support system around me that says, hey, you're good enough to do this. This is something that we will be backing you the entire way. But having the belief that I could get over those knee surgeries, especially that were so challenging throughout my career, just knowing that I would need the strength to come back, but it was mental strength, right? If I didn't believe that in myself, if I wasn't confident in myself, it would have been a much bumpier road to be able to come back and rehab off of those knees. And I know several athletes that have been hurt, several athletes that have gone through ACL surgeries. And if you don't believe that you can come back off of that, that's the first step, right? And if you don't believe that, you're going to have a hard road because it's just going to be longer. It's going to be more of that negative self-talk, more of just those days where it's just grueling trying to get through the painful rehab. It becomes longer and it becomes more taxing on you, right? And more depressing. And so faith played a huge role in getting through that and coming to BYU. And soon after, I met my husband, and I just think everything kind of lined up for me because I believed in the process and believed, that I could get to where I wanted to be and reach my goals.
That's great. Do you feel like God was in the details of all of those things? And how did your relationship with God evolve in those difficult moments?
Absolutely. I would say for sure because, I came, it was mid-December, and I met my husband 3 weeks later when I came to BYU. And I really feel like, looking back, I got hurt for a reason. You never want to think you get hurt for, a bigger picture. But I really do think that I went through that whole process of hurting my knee at the end of my freshman year at Boise State, evolving into finally I transferred midway through, and then meeting my husband 3 weeks later. So we met and got married 6 months later. And, we've been married 20 plus years now. And so I just think a lot of that played into the hands of having faith and belief that God was helping me out and with me along the way. And and of course, no, it's not all going to be controlled, by God and what I'm doing. And I'm making my own choices along the way. But I do feel like certain things happen for a reason, that I was brought to BYU for a reason. I was recruited by BYU out of high school, and this was a school I just chose not to go to, which is kind of bizarre that it came full circle and I did come back to BYU. And the same goes for broadcasting. All those, moments where I interviewed for a coaching job, I was frustrated and continued to think, well, why is this not working out for me to be a coach? I thought for so long I'm going to coach, right, at the college level. And then the door swings wide open for broadcasting. And I do believe that was meant to be and that there was a reason and God had a hand in that.
For sure. Well, Kristen, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. Keep up all the good work that you're doing in your life. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it, Tyler.